I wish everyone a very well afternoon. I would like to thank every previous speaker who shared their insights with us today. And I would especially thank everyone who still kept sticking with us. As you, as you can see, I will talk a little bit about the autonomous vehicles on the road from the perspective of a manufacturer's liability for damages. First of all, I would like to say that it will be a very broad and short presentation, which may or may not be a little bit too technical. Uh, in the introduction, I will briefly say a little bit about the current problems, the current state of art, the definitions that we are facing, and the perspectives. The perspective will be mostly from a consumer perspective, uh, because the most problems that we currently have arise from everyday vehicles that are on the road. Special problems from a technical standpoint will be in relations autonomous vehicles to autonomous vehicles to conventional ones, and in the end, autonomous vehicles against everything that is on the road. To start with, I will first present to you the conclusion that we have to the big question: do we actually need more regulations? The options are as follows. The first one would be to treat autonomous vehicles as conventional ones. That would mean that a autonomous vehicle, it has AVs, would be as any other product. It would be considered a movable object, and therefore regulations as we have it today is already applicable to AVs. Another option would be to treat them as elevators or lifts or as autopilot technology. What does that mean? When you enter an elevator, the only thing that you have to do is to push a button, and it either pulls you up or pushes you down. So a natural person inside an elevator does not have any ability to stop the elevator except the emergency button. Therefore, if you look at a mechanism that applies to elevators, something very simple as that could be applied to autonomous vehicles of the highest level of autonomy. The last option would be to make a brand new legal framework for autonomous vehicles, where we would have a new set of rules, we would have special rights for the injured party, new deadlines, new limitations, and so on. I will try to, as simple as possible, explain why is one option better than the other. Nowadays, we have several national regulations. We have some general acts. We have plenty subordinary acts, regulations, rule books, provisions that regulate vehicles in every possible aspect. Some are more technical, others are more or less legal. But all in all, we have already a plethora of documents that are very useful, and they could be applied even to AVs. A really great option on the EU market level would be if the Commission would adapt a new proposal, especially if it would be a regulation which would try and unify everything that we have on the market and try to produce a set of rules for vehicles which could be on the European roads. The definition of the vehicle is a little bit hard to define it, even as I think we've talked yesterday about autonomous vessels and what do they present and how we could treat them. Here's a definition that I especially liked. It basically has three elements. It has a mean, which could be a artificial intelligence or a similar technology that could control or monitor the vehicle, and it that artificial intelligence, let's say, could control or monitor the vehicle, but it should but the question is, should it or shouldn't it have a human person that would be a backup options if the technology fails? Currently, we have several definitions which are used by four states from the United States. I think that California, they produced a definition that suits them very well. The Silicon Valley has basically every company that produces AVs that we have today. So it's very natural that they have a terminology that fits them. But the other option would be to treat AVs as any other movable object, and that would make it even a little bit simpler for us today. Here I have a picture of Waymo's self-driving car. This is from this year's taken, and this is one of the Teslas that is on the road since the beginning of the year. As you may see, Waymo is a daughter company from Google, formerly known as Alphabet, and it has a little more elements from a technical perspective, as there are several sensors and cameras on the outside of the vehicle. Well, the Tesla is, I would say, a conventional car that is in everyday use. The third option that actually exists is, for example, Waymo's technology that could be implemented into any day's conventional car, and there might be a possibility in a few years, more likely decades, to turn any conventional vehicle into a autonomous one. The question that is still above our heads is, do we actually need a driver? The Vienna Convention specifically said that every moving vehicle should have a driver. The Geneva Convention had something similar, while in March 2018 there was a adoption, there was an amendment which opened doors to AVs, because from that point there is a possibility that a technology could drive or operate the vehicle, therefore no human driver would be needed. In Waymo's technology, they have, I wouldn't even say that that is an autonomous vehicle. A more specific terminology would be a self-driving vehicle, because actually you don't have anyone at the driver's seat, and I will show another picture of it a little bit later. Tesla is a little bit different in that aspect. Tesla doesn't even have yet a fully autonomous vehicle. The Society of Automobile Engineers has five levels of autonomy, and the level of autonomy that I'm speaking about is of the highest level, of the 5th level, and Tesla is here operating at the 3rd or 2nd level. The difference here is that the driver has always to be at a seat, otherwise the vehicle will not move. The vehicle will present some messages that will say that the driver has to be at a seat, the driver has to be focused, the driver has to at any moment of time be able to take control over the vehicle. And this is the message that Waymo has on the driver's seat. On the wheel, it says, "Do not touch the steering wheel or pedals, otherwise the vehicle will pull over." The vehicle's ability to pull over is actually a defensive mechanism that is currently really well adapted to the roads when it does not detect an object or a person or any other obstacle that it doesn't feel comfortable with, and therefore it will pull over for the safety of the passengers. The next challenge would be to identify the manufacturer. This is a definition that is copy-paste from the directive for defective products. I am quite sure that every EU member state has something similar to that, because it helps broadly to identify the person who is the manufacturer, and therefore the consumers, the injured party, the damaged party, has a really easy road to sue someone to raise a claim against. Another question that could be asked is the software or the hardware more important in the car, and therefore who would be more responsible? But that is just a whole, that would need just a whole different presentation, because there are currently different types of autonomous cars, and some have more of a software advancement, while the others have a more hardware one. Now I will say a few words about the non-contractual liability for damages for the manufacturer. Elaine Herzberg was the first person who died of a fully self-driving Uber car in 2018. The car had actually a driver present, but both of them were not able to detect her as she was crossing. She was illegally crossing the road, but neither the car nor the driver could see her. Unfortunately, there are many out-of-court settlements, and we do not have real insights on what happened and how did they, what were the settlement amounts, or how otherwise have they handled it. Now, what is the moment from which is the manufacturer liable? He's liable actually from the very moment that it was the product in the market. It doesn't mean, it does not, it is relevant if it's for sale, rent, lease, or any form, or any other form. The scope of liability for the manufacturer is very strict. The injured party does not have to prove that the manufacturer was acting faulty for the defect. It's a strict liability system, which is very good. It actually motivates the manufacturers to produce a better product, and the only real obligation that the manufacturer has is to inform the users of the hazardous properties of their own products. So basically, if it fails to inform them properly, it will be more or easily liable for the damages. As you see, we have here a safety standard by our Directive on Product Liability. There are 3 questions that we have to ask ourselves. Is the product presented in a way that is very clear and understandable to the consumer? For example, Tesla's self-driving is very well marketed. They have a great team behind their cars, and they are very proudly saying that it has full self-driving capabilities, but that isn't the case. They are only on the 3rd or 2nd level of autonomy, and most consumers who are not diligent could buy the product believing that it has more functionality than it actually uses. Now, the second criteria would be what is reasonably expected from the product. For example, you cannot expect that a Tesla road vehicle will very well perform off-road. Maybe their new cars, which are SUVs, they should be able to do that. But this is another criteria that has to be satisfied. And the third one is if a product at the moment that it was placed on the market was at the peak of its technological advancements, a consumer cannot sue the manufacturer because a better product came onto the market. The damages have to be more than 500 euros because it does not pay for the manufacturer to go into court for small claims. The exception is the human life, and it is very hard actually to prove the damages, although the injured party has to prove damage, the defect, and the casual relationship between those two. There's an idea to have a black box inside of the car, like in the planes, but it opens more questions than it answers them. It should be possible for the manufacturer to change those informations that were recorded into the black box, and no one actually has at this moment of time, no one would have access to the black box except the producer of it, and so on. The current framework has all the liability on the manufacturer. Well, that is because if we ever get to a level 5 of autonomy, the natural person behind the steering wheel shouldn't be able to have any control over the car. Although it should have the ability to take over all the controls, but during the autopilot mode, during the autonomy, during the self-driving mode, the human driver does not have any effect on the driving itself. Of course, we have a few more questions which could be regulated into a new regulation or otherwise answered to. Now, from a Croatian national perspective, we have a taxative list of reasons which exonerate the manufacturer of its responsibility. Funnily enough, force majeure is not on the list, which would mean that a manufacturer who during the pandemic did not have competent enough workers, engineers in his production stores could not claim that the defect is that the defect could be because the pandemic did not allow him to employ competent enough people who would make a product more safe. Other reasons which could exonerate the producer would be if we had a test vehicle and someone, for example, stole it and drove it off and did some damage or hurt himself. It could be that a sensor was subsequently damaged and now, therefore it doesn't work very well and it doesn't generate enough data. And if we have an exhibit model as well. What are the current opportunities and challenges? Well, we have to inform the consumers very well. We have to give them regular notices. There will have to be much more discussions in the public. We will actually have to even maybe learn how to use them, handle autonomous vehicles. I believe that the manufacturers will have to gather an insurance pool where they could put money in a case of a class action suit or something like that. Of course, other problems that arise from it are that the manufacturers will have to share data because the behavioral dynamics of driving the world is very different. You see it in Asia, you see it in Europe, the roads are different, everything is so different, and it is so hard for a vehicle to gather all the data and analyze it in a right way. And I will show you the challenges on the picture next before I summarize. Now, as you see, we can have a co-responsible parties, and I believe that some future will have even modifications of parts. There are companies as Ghost and Comma AI who produce parts which specific purpose is to transform a conventional vehicle into a autonomous vehicles, and we'll have to regulate even who gets to go on the road. This will not be in the next 10 years, maybe in 20 or several more decades, but we have to be aware of it very early. Now, this is a presentation of how it looks to a autonomous car. As you may see, there are you have other vehicles on the road. You have pedestrians, you have cyclists, you have a building on the right side. You have to know if you're in a parking lot, if you're on the road, if you're on the highway. Therefore, many challenges. To sum up, some brief conclusions are the public's perception currently is just way off. The price and availability in many regions, we will not expect AVs maybe in the next 50, 60 years, who knows. Car sharing services may be the first ones who will have AVs, and we will see how they will handle the public roads and the public transportation. Now, the big question is, what does actually make a product safe? And I believe that we will at least have to have some guidelines, guidebook, or shared good practices in order to make the best cars that are very safe for a rational consumer, for a average consumer, and who will likely brake and stop the car before they engage into a situation that they do not feel comfortable with. Now, to conclude, car makers, I believe, would really enjoy it if they had legal certainty, a framework that they that they could rely on, because at this moment of time, everyone tries to make the best of it, but we'll see what happens. I would conclude with this, my presentation. If you have any questions, I am open to them, and thank you for watching.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Klasić. I think if any other colleagues are here would decide to make a conference on autonomous vehicles on road driverless cars, all you would need is to take your presentation and then assign each individual speaker with one of the points that questions that you raised during your speech. I think that would make for a wonderful presentation.